Hey there, Vladimir. So I saw you, and I just wanted to reach out and say hi, record you this personal video message to tell you about how to make the most of this big opportunity right now in blockchain. Because, it's crazy. Like, I can charge $1,000 per hour as a freelancer, and I haven't been a blockchain developer that long in the grand scheme of things. I even got rejected from coding bootcamp, okay? But anyways, Vladimir, I want to help you take advantage of this big opportunity.
Greetings everyone, Sunrostan here. And last time we talked about a scenario where an engineer who is in the middle of their career can attain a net worth of $1 million by following 5 steps or tips with a strategy to attain that net worth. And one of the steps was to upskill in order to become more valuable in the marketplace. And so one of the routes in the upskilling process within software engineering is the field of Web3 or blockchain related field. So what is Web3 and why should we care? Before I can expand on what Web3 is, let's talk about what Web2 and Web1 are. And those terms are relatively recent. People didn't use those terms until there was a need to differentiate between the paradigms of web. So the Web 1 is now commonly referred to as static websites, the original World Wide Web, where a project was initiated by government-related institutions and universities to exchange information in an online manner. Static web pages were created. You're familiar with those HTML bare bones pages that were used to exchange information as if you were exchanging books. So that was Web 1. You could not interact with those. It was just read-only type stuff. You write a page, you share the information, and that's about it. So in the 90s or so. So in the beginning of 2000s, with services like Facebook and Yahoo and others, MySpace, if you're old enough to remember, you started seeing web pages or services that would allow you to update your profile and interact with other users on the web. And so it became more dynamic, more user-driven, where you could exchange information and interact with others. More businesses and advertisers would actually be advancing their marketing strategies using that type of content. However, one of the features of that would actually be inherited from Web 1. That is, all the services would be centralized. That is, if you're Facebook and you're providing the service of Facebook with the editable content that belongs to you, and you could post and like and share different posts, or with YouTube you could share videos, etc. All the services would be hosted by and controlled by one company, that is Facebook, for the Facebook ecosystem. For YouTube, later on it would be part of Google, so Google would control that ecosystem, etc. And with that, of course, it would be up to them to control what is shared, what is not. They could censor according to their own rationale and business goals. And around 2008-2009 financial crisis, there was an interesting phenomenon where banks essentially triggered the worldwide economic crisis. And the gist of it was they gambled with derivative products. That is, one of those would be mortgage-backed securities. So a bunch of mortgages would be packaged into different tier products, and they would be traded as entities and the fractions of those entities between banks. And so they would essentially make the collections of mortgages as securities that you could buy and sell and leverage against. The reason for that being a mess is because back then there were a lot of mortgages that people could borrow with very little substantiation of their worthiness to borrow those funds. In other words, those were poor loans that people could not actually afford. There was no sound ratio of, income or assets behind those things, but mainly income. Basically, people were borrowing money for their real estate mortgages that they should not have been able to afford normally. Bad loans. So bad loans, when people started losing jobs, they started selling the distressed properties. Banks started to foreclose on those mortgages, and that triggered a chain effect to where the entire ecosystem, the financial ecosystem, started to trickle down like dominoes. So usually banks would suffer from that pattern of decision making, and so banks would normally collapse because they made a poor choice, poor business decision, and the consequence of that, the banks would collapse or close down their doors. But what's interesting about the 2008-2009 financial crisis is the government decided that some institutions, the major banks, would be too systematically significant, that is, too big to fail. For example, if they would fail because of their poor decisions, the entire economic system would unwind. So in order to prevent that from happening, they decided to bail them out. In other words, banks went and gambled with their mortgage, greed play. They lost a bunch of money, and normally they would go bankrupt. But government stepped in, and because of their significance in the financial ecosystem and the economy in general, they gave public funds to bail out those banks. And the funny part is the leaders of those banks then flew on their private jets to talk about how they could obtain public funds to stay afloat, which is a different story, but I thought it was hilarious because people's reaction at the time was, "What are you doing?" Anyways, people were observing that kind of stuff happening. Normal, regular folks were suffering. And it was apparent that it was kind of a two-tiered system. One is for the banks or the elites, and one is for the common people. And common people really got screwed because they were the ones with mortgage defaults, with no jobs, with pretty poor conditions. And even though the perpetrators were the banks, the people suffered. And imagine that sets the stage for Bitcoin, where Satoshi Nakamoto, whether it's an individual or a group of people, it's unknown. But that entity, Satoshi, he published a paper about the electronic cash system called Bitcoin. And he introduces the technology of blockchain with it. So today we're using blockchain as kind of a general term, but really blockchain came to us via Bitcoin. And so that leads up to Web3. As a reminder, Web2 was content that we were able to manipulate, but the services were centralized. So one company would control its ecosystem, and if it was large enough, they could essentially create their ability to censor a lot of, to censor or limit the reach of the participants in their ecosystem. Now come Bitcoin, and the new Web3 approach is decentralization of those assets. So the concept is no one big central entity could control how that ecosystem would operate, because it would be distributed to a point where anyone in their willing participation can enter the system, and no one can ban them from participating in that system, which was very appealing. It was a response of the perceived unfairness that the authors of Bitcoin, or the author of Bitcoin, would pose in the white paper. And the resources to those things I would post down in the description below in a vellum, so you can explore the information on your own time for interest. But that is kind of the background of what Web3 is and why we should care. Now, with that being said, in 2017, so backtracking, in 2008, 2009, Bitcoin was introduced. And then it was kind of not taken seriously by the majority or by a large number of people. People were able to buy Bitcoin for several cents or for several dollars in the period of between 2009 and probably 2013. But then Bitcoin started to gain traction, gain interest among the enthusiasts. And come 2017, that's when Bitcoin price reached about $18,000. That's when people started caring. And I'm talking about mainstream. I'm talking about institutions and just regular people being interested in the technology. But then that bubble popped at the time, and Bitcoin went down in price to support level that is around 3,000-ish until 2020, 2021 hype again, when a new wave of interest started to apply to Bitcoin and its price reached about $60,000, pretty significant. There was an introduction of other cryptocurrencies, such as Ethereum and other tokens and blockchains underneath those tokens that would serve different utilities and solve different problems. Now, in 2022, there was a kind of a cooling off of the blockchain enthusiasm that was culminated with FTX US failure, where I guess the users of FTX lost a bunch of money. And maybe you've heard about the story about Sam Bankman-Fried and that debacle. Anyways, that's a topic for a different story, but I wanted to mention that as it was part of the series of events that really negatively affected the Web3 space. And now in 2023, this year, even though the price is around 30,000, the general interest in the Web3 space is lacking. It's not as big. The investors are not as eager to invest into the space as they were back in 2021. And some of the applications of Web3 would include, well, the biggest one for blockchain, especially decentralized blockchain, is that decentralization, where people can transact and interact with the system without particular permission from a central authority. And it also opens up a variety of opportunities to make systems and organizations more fair to an average user, more open, more transparent. And so that leads up to, so I hope that this backstory, although brief, answers the question why we might be interested in that technology. And one of the ways to upskill in that area, if you're a software engineer, is to learn about blockchain, Web3, and how it's being used today. What are the prospects of blockchain technologies, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, or cryptocurrencies, or other tokens that serve particular utilities or solve problems. So one of the individuals in the Web3 space is the founder of Dapp University. His name is Gregory, and he is a very active persona in the blockchain and Web3 space. And he is also a very bright engineer who has lots of interesting and helpful insight into the space. And I got to chat with him about becoming a Web3 developer and what prospects you would be looking at. I hope this conversation and snippets of information would help you to decide if this space is right for you, is of interest to you, as one of the pathways to upskilling and getting closer to the goal of having a net worth of $1 million plus. That's what the series is about. So hopefully you find this info interesting.
I'm a pretty big believer that we're gonna enter into a new phase of crypto expansion that is gonna really grow the pie in the space. We're already working on a lot of cool stuff. And right now is an amazing time to get skills and, jump on new exciting projects. And you'll be way ahead of that next wave that I do believe is going to get here. So now's a great time to be, doing what you're doing. Before I was a blockchain developer, I worked in software development and, worked with projects, the same type of thing. They got acquired and, axed half their team or like running out of money or something like that. But those are some of the things that I needed to, move on to the next thing. And, when you're in a sink or swim situation like that, sometimes that's what you need to really, light a fire underneath you in order to make a change. What you want to do is have multiple sort of points of entry into the industry in terms of what you can do. And, having that infrastructure background is going to be a big asset to you and the experience that you've had at this other project for sure. Because a lot of people, they're starting from scratch, you know what I mean? Whether they're experienced developers, maybe in Web 2, you know what I mean? But without like that specific Web3 experience, but now you have specific Web3 experience, and then you're increasing your Web3 skills, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to make that transition than somebody who's just coming from Web2 or somebody who has no experience in anything or something like that. So, I've done a lot of work in the past, just doing blockchain development, have done a lot of, obviously, work with the digital courses for people to kind of do self-paced stuff. But I identified that there's a lot of people who want something more than that, you know what I mean? An opportunity to work with other people and, get that expertise. And I knew how instrumental that was to me when I was first getting started, having that type of mentorship. And yeah, this is sort of the next level of all that as a more personalized way to help people transition the industry. And, that's really the end goal for Dapp University itself, is to be the best resource for people to do that. So I would say we're kind of getting to that next level right now. Well, great, Vladimir. It's great to meet you.